Hello and welcome everyone to today's IFSEC Connect Strat Talk webinar, where we'll be discussing the topic of protecting cities and public spaces. Thank you to Avigilon and Motorola Solutions for sponsoring today's discussion. I'm James Moore, editor of IFSEC Global, and I'll be introducing and moderating today. Just a few things to note before we get started. This webinar is designed to be interactive, so please do ask any questions you have and would like answered by panelists in the Q&A box on the top right of your screen. We've got several items for discussion already on the agenda, but have left plenty of time for audience questions. Please just make it clear if the question is directed at a specific panelist, just so I know who to ask. Questions will not be made public, but will be fed through to me separately, so don't be alarmed if you can't see anything coming through on the viewing platform itself. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please just type any issues into the Need Help chat box, and one of the technical team will be on hand to support you. And if you'd like to watch the webinar back or you have any internet issues during the session, don't worry, this will be recorded and available to watch back on demand throughout June. So feel free to log back on any time or just catch up between meetings on the platform to watch at your leisure. There's also plenty of other security related content already available to watch back from earlier this month, including lots of product demos and 3 engaging panel discussions on trends and challenges in video surveillance, access control and intruder alarms. And I'd certainly encourage everyone to take a look at them if you've got some spare time. So what are we discussing today and why? Well, over the next hour, we'll be focusing on the crucial topic of public safety in our cities and urban environments. In a world where there are ever increasing threat levels and as cities become even more digitized and connected, it is vital that we protect citizens and organizations from physical and cyber threats. Police and law enforcement no doubt has its role to play, but so too does the private security sector, from end users through to consultants and installers. A key theme of today's discussion will look at how an integrated approach can support the development of large, secure urban areas, and how this might progress over the coming years. And how will technology and physical security procedures converge and develop to mitigate emerging threats? We've seen several incidents in recent years of the threat posed to urban environments, terror attacks in London and Manchester, as well as incidents in Vienna and France, and that's just Europe. Surveys have shown the public remains concerned over the threat as countries continue to emerge from lockdowns, while the UK is working on legislation as a result of the tragic Manchester Arena attack in May 2017 as we speak. Martin's Law, or the Protect Duty as it is officially known, has been campaigned for tirelessly by Figan Murray, the mother of Martin Hett, one of the victims of the Arena attack, and is currently under consultation for how public spaces can be better protected and set up to mitigate these threats. There's also the cyber issue. Severe incidents have been making headlines this year, where critical national infrastructure in the US and elsewhere has been a victim of cyber attacks. And as cities become ever more connected, which increasingly involve IoT-based physical security devices, such as surveillance cameras and access points, how does the industry ensure that they're on top of these issues and aware of the threat? I'm delighted to be joined by today's panel, each of whom can provide their own unique thoughts and expert insights into the issues at hand. You can find out a little bit more about their roles in the bios on the left of your screen, but I'll just firstly allow them to each introduce themselves and then we'll get going. So first up, we have Sarb Sembhi, CTO and CISO at Virtually Informed and co-chair of the IoT Security Foundation Smart Built Environment Group. Hi Sarb, do you want to give us a quick overview of your experience?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much for having me on this. It's a real honour and a privilege, as always, James. My background, I first looked into the vulnerabilities of network CCTV systems about 15, 16 years ago, and I was amazed at how easy that there were to break into. Then I looked at heating, lighting, air conditioning, and a few years later I met James, and I've done a lot of work with James Willison around smart cities, smart buildings as well. I'll end it there. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Sarb. Next, we have James Willison, founder of Unified Security and also co-chair of the IoT Security Foundation Smart Built Environment Group. Hi, James. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, James. A pleasure to be here again. And I started out in the physical security industry about 25 plus years ago, 1990s. Worked as a supervisor in various control rooms. And I got a bit concerned about the lack of cybersecurity even then on those things. But I then did some work with BP on various digital physical convergence projects. And that led me to working with ASIS on convergence and ESRM, which is basically bringing together physical and information security people to look at risks together. It's as simple as that, but it's a bit of an effort. But we're doing it now more. And so now we're working on with Sarb, with the Internet of Things Security Foundation, on this sort of subject for smart built environments, which obviously has an impact on large urban areas.
Perfect. Yeah. We're also joined by Mark Beverly, Senior Sales Director at Avigilon, part of Motorola Solutions. Hi, Mark. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, James. Hi, everybody. As you heard, Mark Weatherly, I look after all the sales for Avigilon for the UK, Ireland and Benelux areas. So I've been with Avigilon as a manufacturer for around about 7 years. Through that time, deployed various different projects through national infrastructure, banking, correctional, healthcare, you name it, many verticals. And before that, similar story, but I worked through the integration path prior to that. So used to working with end users and understanding their needs and what they need from systems for today.
Excellent, thanks, Mark. And finally, we have Stuart Williams, who is founder of Blackford Security Consultants and also representing the Security Institute today. Hi, Stuart, do you want to give us a little bit more background into your experience?
Yeah, thanks ever so much, James. Yes, I founded Blackford Security Consultants a year ago, primarily to focus on exactly what we're talking about today, really, in the delivery of security in the built environment. From a background, I'm a chartered security professional, and I'm one of the registrars for the Register of Chartered Security Professional Registration Authority. Representing the Security Institute, I'm a fellow of the Security Institute, and I'm a member of their Built Environment Special Interest Group and the Counter-Terrorism Special Interest Group. I initially worked in the military covering intelligence and security, but the latter half of my working life has been as a commercial security consultant. I've worked for most of the major multidisciplinary engineering companies like Bureau Happold. I've also worked with some of the security risk companies like Control Risks. More recently, I'm supporting WSP in a lot of their Middle East major developments. And for 10 years, up until a couple of years ago, I lived and worked in the Middle East, mainly in Abu Dhabi, and I worked for major developers, and in particular the Abu Dhabi Urban Planning Council. And their aim was very aspirational, which was to embed security into all of their major developments as early as possible from the outset. And that included running their National Counter-Terrorism Protection Program.
Perfect. So yeah, as you can see, we've got a lot of experience on the panel today. Thank you all for joining. First up, I'm just going to hand over to Sarb, who's got a few slides he'd like to share on the world of cybersecurity. We know many of those who join us at IFSEC each year and on these panels have lots of experience in the physical side. So we thought it would be good if Sarb, you could just give us a little insight into the kind of main concerns in the cyber arena at the moment. I think you might just be muted, Sarb.
Yep, sorry about that, just realised. Yeah, thanks very much. My apologies, there was so much I was trying to get in, so I'm going to sort of go through these slides very quickly so we can get on to some of the other experts that are on this panel. First of all, I think it's, oh, there we go. Challenge to threats in smart cities. The challenges are vast. They range everything from code libraries that manufacturers will have purchased, where they're relying on the developers that developed those to make sure that there's no vulnerabilities in those. The challenges around vulnerabilities that the vendor might add into whatever they're developing, whether it's on the client side or the server side, then the vulnerability in technology standards and protocols. We've had many of those vulnerabilities in the configuration or the installation of devices, the systems and the connections. Then you move on from there to the management of the devices, the day-to-day stuff. And then you've got social engineering of people being hacked into by those who are tricksters, fraudsters, and so on. And then you've got the data collection type of things, where basically with so many data collection practices, what's happening is that vendors and or facilities teams are making themselves targets with the volume of data and the type of data that they're collecting. Then you've got issues around the challenges of the usage of that data once it's been collected. And we've seen that with vendors like Amazon with their Ring and several other vendors where the video has been collected and it's been viewed by people or used for things that it shouldn't have been used for. And there is a need for an integrated approach, because partly we've seen that, you know, there is a need for an effective overall governance of smart city projects, which isn't separate from the infrastructure management, and an understanding of the skills required to manage the security of the smart city, while the focus is on achieving citizen benefits. What tends to happen, we've seen so many times, is there's that focus on citizen benefits that tends to ignore the rest of the skills, including cybersecurity, that's actually required to manage the whole project as a complete project, rather than focus on health or this or that or anything else. Also, you know, they must provide a complete situational awareness to manage threats from the outset, not as an afterthought. Whereas the way that we've seen smart cities organized, basically you've got bits of situational awareness depending on which infrastructure that's being connected to what's being called a smart city. Got many vendors which may well be better educated than buyers, but they don't actually have a stable of secure systems, and they aren't promoting the secure products. And we've seen that quite a few times as well with several vendors on the market at the moment. And an integrated, you know, approach is just something that it isn't just within the smart city. It has to be something that's integrated right in everyone's thinking, in all the stakeholders, from the developers, right in the third-party libraries, through to the decommissioning. It can't just be the domain of cybersecurity people, or the physical security people, or the this people or that people. It has to be everyone that we're talking about. And in terms of the future continuing or emerging threats, there are many, including the sort of continued lack of governance in integrating and preparing for an integrated SOC of some sort, not as an afterthought, but right on the outset. There's a lot of siloed thinking still, and it will carry on probably. And while it does so, it involves many of the different C-suites building their empires of protectionism and keeping whatever they're doing to themselves, rather than managing what needs to be managed in terms of overall risk protection. Lots of new and emerging vulnerabilities in established technology standards. We've seen this over the weekend with the Wi-Fi standard approach for Apple in Apple products. It now basically means that if an Apple product is attacked using this particular type of attack, that device becomes disabled. You can't reboot it. You can't do anything to bring it back. So it's that sort of thing I'm talking about. Management of the corporate airspace. That means managing every part of the space, from drones, from you know, Wi-Fi attacks, absolutely everything, and knowing what's there and what's not there. Abuse of privacy in the name of surveillance. Many smart cities around the world have been set up, and they're set up calling themselves smart cities, but really they're probably nothing more than, you know, the surveillance state being, you know, accelerated faster than it should be. Increased surveillance data is increasing the number of staff that are open to blackmail as blackmail targets, because the bad guys want these guys to do what they want them to do when they're attacking. Continued use and delay of replacement of vulnerability devices and systems. There are many vulnerable devices out there at the moment being used, and they are going to carry on being used instead of being scrapped and replaced by non-vulnerable devices. They're going to cause big problems in the future. Continued use of delayed and replacement and vulnerable systems, infrastructure. The lifespan basically is actually quite short compared to the way that they're being used. Many products and systems and services are in place much longer than they need to be. They're not being replaced for security. Lots of new and emerging technologies. And the last one in that list is the vulnerability of single device, leading to ransomware on all other connected infrastructures. That's about as much as I'm going to say, apart from one image, and it's an illustration of my view on some of the smart cities, not all of them, around in the world. It's basically this diagram here. And my analogy here is, if you were somewhere there and you decided and you saw a friend of yours on the other side somewhere, some of these smart city projects are very much like that. They see benefits to the citizen And what they do is, instead of looking how they should be crossing, they just go straight out there trying to cross because they're seeing the benefit of seeing their friend on the other side of the street and not looking around at what's coming to them and at them from all the different angles. And they haven't got that situational awareness. They're just focusing on those end benefits in many respects. That's the view I have of many of the smart cities, but I'll stop there and pass back to you, James. Thanks very much.
Sarb, that was excellent. Thank you very much, and a really good introduction there to a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about. So we'll now move on to just a bit of a panel discussion. As I said at the beginning, audience members, if you want to get any questions in, please do send them through. I'll try and kind of filter them through as we're going onto the same topics. And I think firstly, following on from everything that Sarb has just said there, James, how do you think we can bridge the gap between physical and cyber? You obviously work with IFSEC on the Converge Security Centre every year. How can these solutions help in managing risks at the same time?
Yes, that's right. It's a great pleasure to work with Sarb and others on the Converge Security Centre, which basically brings in loads of technology so that you can see them on one platform. So instead of all these different systems that Sarb was just showing you there on the last slide, they're all actually into one centre where they can be seen. And then they have this also capability of using a good artificial intelligence, something that's capable and powerful rather than perhaps not such a good one, that can help them identify which are really important risks to get a hold of and then respond to. So the difference with the Converge Security Centre is that we also can monitor cyber attacks, so that any cyber issues, whether that be on social media or whether it actually is an attack from online, so someone is actually trying to break in to one of those buildings from online and then creates a physical disturbance with someone else going in through the front door, working together. That sort of capability, something is what you can see with the technology that we already have, because people think, oh, this is not possible, we can't do this, we're only physical security. Well, that's just not the case, because those technologies are available, except the problem is that not enough companies are using them. And it's through the lack of investment, which is the main issue, the lack of preparedness to spend money on these technologies, and then also educate people in the actual control room to understand what's going on, and having cyber and physical security people in the control room to understand the issues and then work out what we can do about them. At the moment, we don't have hardly anything on. That's the whole problem, really. So we're like a sitting duck.
Yeah, and as you say, a lot of this seems to be about cyber and physical being in the same room together in many ways and talking to each other about these things.
Well, right.
Stuart, obviously from your experience, how important is that security that risk management professionals and other stakeholders take a holistic approach to this kind of cyber and physical threat? Is this something you've seen happen, for example, in the Middle East when you've been working on projects, from the ground upwards, I guess?
Yeah. Well, firstly, it's undoubtedly important. Recent history shows it's far easier for criminals to steal from a bank or to attack infrastructure by digital means than it ever is from a physical attack. And I think what particularly worries me as a security professional is the scale of the consequences. The amount of money that can be stolen digitally, but you're limited when you rob a bank physically, how much you can fit in a van. It weighs, the gold bars weigh, but the press of a switch, you can steal a whole bank. And if you do it cleverly, people don't even know it's happened. And the same for some of the sabotage attacks on the infrastructure. You're not talking about taking out one transformer, you're taking out a whole utility across a nation. So the scale of it is enormous, and that's a much, much bigger challenge than I think a lot of physical security tends to look site level, whereas cyber is organization level, and I think that's a big difference. But I don't think one is more important than the other. Physical is still as important. An adversary's got all of those attack methodologies available to them. Some will obviously be better at cyber, some will be physical. The better ones, as James alluded to a second ago, will do both together. They'll use the cyber to bring down the physical and attack both at the same time, and one will distract from the other. The industry has been talking about convergence. I mean, I worked in the MOD when we had a sister organization, the Defence Security Standards Organization, that looked both at physical and digital, but we were two parts of the same organization that didn't speak. And that was, back in early 2000, we all talked about convergence. But they are still quite often treated separately. You still see posts out for chief information security officers and head of physical security. You know, some are more informed and they have both, but I don't think it's converged as we like. And particularly in my area of expertise in the built environment, what you quite often see is cyber threats are excluded from the risk assessment process because, to be fair, it doesn't have as much influence on the physical space, the design of the building. You know, they look at it from, as long as I protect the data center and the infrastructure to the data center, there's not much else to worry about. I've been involved on one or two of the smart cities where it gets talked about much earlier in the program. But as Sarb said earlier, it's not always treated, they're not truly genuine smart cities. You know, they just have a bit more connectivity with it. And therefore it tends to get excluded. It's something that someone like Sarb or James will come along at the end and put the hardware and software in place and we're all done, you know. But I think that's changing. You know, there's certainly a growing need to grow security systems and secure them right down to the front end equipment. I think that was one of the last parts of Sarb's last slide there, was referring to, you know, if you can attack one piece of just a card reader or a camera, you can then impact the whole network. And I was at a Gallagher presentation recently where they were talking about pushing that level of encryption and protection right down to the front end. I don't think the built environment has caught up with that yet. I think individual manufacturers have, but the whole process doesn't. And I think that needs to start happening pretty quick. Otherwise, you know, we're designing buildings that will get finished in 2 years, 3 years time. And at that stage, they're completely vulnerable before we've even started.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we've seen from a lot of the surveys we've been doing, the people we've been talking to, is the concern that the physical security device, for example, becomes the vulnerability in the network. And Mark, actually, in terms of protecting physical security devices, like such as surveillance cameras from attacks, is this something that everyone, you think that everyone from the manufacturer through to the installer needs to be thinking about? And what kind of things should we be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's something that everyone's got to do and pull in the same direction for it to be effective, right? So as a manufacturer, we have our own internal policies, our own method of manufacturing, the way we develop our software, and our processes behind the scenes to ensure that products that we put out to market are resilient. You know, but we need everybody to be doing that that would manufacture a product in that chain. So if obviously one link's weak, then as the guys have been saying, it can bring the whole system down and produce that vulnerability.
And are there any particular standards that you're kind of working towards from a manufacturer perspective?
Yeah, there's at the moment, particularly for Motorola, we have a whole product range that's NDDA compliant. And that's to obviously ensure that you know, the products that we produce, we understand the full supply chain of everything that's gone into a box, you know, effectively. So that's really at the core of what we do.
Perfect. And actually, Mark, just to come to you again, we're sort of moving on a bit to the role of surveillance and physical security devices in how they can better protect cities here. We saw in our previous webinar on video surveillance earlier in the month that surveillance cameras, and in particular the development of video analytics, are playing an increasingly important role in sort of smarter cities and more connected cities. They provide further data points and obviously integrate other functions such as traffic control, crowd management, that kind of thing. How do you view this trend? Is this something you're seeing as well?
We are, but I wouldn't say, you know, it's not limited to crowd management, traffic management. There's more and more data points being generated by an array of different sensors. So they could be environmental things like smoke or vape detection, gunshot detection, you know, computer vision that is just driven by some form of AI. So, for example, concealed weapon detection, and then that's combined with those advanced sensors for video analytics. But you can also effectively detect people, but people carrying a bag, for example. But the next step of that with the AI is that you can also have it highlight to an operator if someone entered a location with that bag but left without it. So it gives more of an insight, and that enables the operator to make an informed decision about what to do next and what type of action to take. Yeah,
absolutely. James, obviously you mentioned you previously worked in the physical security industry and as an operator. Have you seen a real advancement in that kind of area over the last 10 to 15 years?
I think there's a lot of great advancements, unfortunately. And as I said, the capability now is to integrate with cybersecurity monitoring, which that's quite difficult to do. And so a lot of these PSIMs that we hear about, you know, the physical security information management systems, they're all very good at bringing together all the physical systems, fantastic stuff, but they're not very good at really bringing in all the cyber ones, although they make a lot of claims about this. Oh, yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. Yes. But actually to do that is another thing. And you need to really have both different systems or platforms working together rather than one of them trying to do all of it. So I think that's something you're seeing advances in, you know, this interest in monitoring all these different cyber attacks or physical attacks. And as Stuart said, you know, both are equal. That's the important thing. And my big concern really, and I think Sarb would agree, is to try and persuade the digital or the cybersecurity people that really the physical guys need some help, because we do. And to see it as a real issue, you know, this is a real risk. IoT camera systems being subject to cyber attack is a major issue now. It's not just something you can, oh, well, we can leave that to the physical security manager. I know it's his responsibility, and we'll come on to this later, or her responsibility, to manage the system, but they need some help.
Yeah, this question coming here about how do we educate the wider industry and stakeholders in this process? Sarb, I don't know if you can kind of respond to that one. Is, you know, obviously cameras are more sophisticated than ever. They're more IP based than ever, connected to a network. Obviously posing more of a risk, as everyone here has kind of alluded to. How do we educate the wider industry about these concerns?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think it's very timely at the moment, because James and I have been working with the IoT Security Foundation Smart Built Environment Group, where we've produced guidance for property managers and property owners and facilities, which actually does cover this, because effectively whatever happens in many organizations is as a result of what happens at the top and the guidance they've been given. And what I'm talking about is governance, and I mentioned that in the presentation earlier. Governance coming from the board is absolutely vital. If the right governance is not provided, and how the team are going to work together, they will continue to work in silos. There's no incentive to do so. And on top of that, if there's no governance and guidance provided on what the board would like procurement to look at, and how seriously they'd like procurement to include security in the requirements, there's no reason why a procurement manager should look at a slightly more expensive system or extra work, or to involve someone with the right cyber experience from an early stage rather than at the later stage. It is going to cost a bit more, wherever it costs, however it costs. It's that education that's quite important, but equally that education has to come from the board and force it down to, in many respects. I think many of the teams, and obviously there's always some exceptions, many teams that we come across, they're always quite happy to work together, but the challenge is, if the structures are siloed, they can't force anything other than that, and that's partly a problem as well. It needs to be forced from on top, and how they can integrate more effectively. And that guidance that we've produced will be available in a couple of months' time. And as I said, it's governance is very important, and this document covers that awareness part in terms of that governance from the board coming down.
That's great, and obviously, yeah, thank you for the question, and please do keep sending them in. Stuart, just to come back to you again, in your experience, how are surveillance cameras improving public safety? How are they being used differently? Are they being thought about differently, maybe in different areas of the world? And what should businesses, facilities, people and venues be in publicly accessible locations be thinking about when specifying surveillance solutions, do you think?
Yeah, I think the first point I was at, I mean, surveillance is here to stay. You know, we're not going to undo it. It's a fundamental part of pretty much every new city, every development, every security strategy. And while it's not the solution for everything, it is vital to the safe management of public space, as is private space in any commercial environment that you work in. It's vital to the management of operations, and as James alluded to there, it's starting to bring everything together. You know, you shouldn't just be using the surveillance for your public spaces. You've got your private spaces, your data centers where your cybersecurity risks are. And as Mark mentioned, some of the other tools that are now coming online, whether it's watching people, whether it's gunshot detection, it can all come together in a much greater sort of environment that provides a picture of what is happening. And that's ultimately why it's all there. You know, the security manager of a site needs to know what is happening on site, either physically or virtually, and they need to be able to respond as quickly as possible. So any tool that enables us to do that is a bonus. And for me, it's a vital component of any security strategy, physical or virtual, especially for publicly accessible locations. I think it's worthy to note the report came out from the Manchester Arena inquiry this week, and what came out very clear in that was the attacker spent 20 minutes in a blind spot in the main entrance of the arena. He then returned and sat there for another hour, and there have been 3 other occasions when he went to do hostile reconnaissance. And a direct quote is that inadequate CCTV system was the cause of a missed opportunity. Someone should have detected someone with a backpack sitting there for an hour and 20 minutes in an area where he shouldn't have been. And whilst, and I think the report is fair with this, and whilst it may not have prevented it from happening, it would have happened when a lot less people were in that environment. And that shows the value of it. But I think what it also highlights is about how much CCTV is misunderstood about what it can do and it can't do. If you don't have total coverage and you've got blind spots, right? Criminals and terrorists aren't silly. They'll work out where your blind spots are. This, you know, the Manchester Arena had CCTV. And I'm sure when it was audited, people have gone, oh, it's got good cameras and it's got control rooms, but it didn't have 100% coverage. And when people like me come along and specify it, people go, can you remove some cameras? You know, the costs are high. Yes, you can, but you're taking a risk. If you've got a blind spot, someone will take advantage of it. And that's our job, is to try and remove those, but there's always a commercial pressure to try and reduce it as much as possible. And that introduces risk, and then bad ththings happen. And I think a lot of that comes down to the portrayal. Is the same with the governance of cyber risks. You know, it's not the cost of £100,000 or £1 million for a new system, is what goes wrong if you don't. And if you get hacked and you've got to pay hundreds of millions in ransom, which what people have done recently for cyber attacks, or if you're being fined by the information commissioner for a massive data loss or your company reputation, or in this case, a bomb goes off and a significant number of people are injured or killed, that's the downfall. And I think we present it wrong. We say we need money for this system. Actually, it should be put in terms of risk. And I know a lot of CEOs and boards will go, oh, well, that's unrealistic. Actually, it isn't. You know, I'm sure Sarb can produce a list of thousands of cyber attacks and their impacts every day. And it's the same with terrorism. There's a terrorist attack happening everywhere, every day. And our job is to try and reduce that to a reasonable, practical level. And I think a lot of people just want to sort of go down the complacency path. That was noted in the Manchester Arena, with people going, yes, we know the threat level was severe at the time, and yes, we're a crowded place, but it won't happen to Manchester. And unfortunately it did. And that's our role in producing that and presenting that in a way that people recognize. I think certainly going forward, I think there's a lot of people that don't specify the system right. They don't fully understand what they want the system to do and what they want to achieve from it. And I think they should be going to qualified consultants that can do that. They should definitely follow a systematic process. You know, it should start with a risk assessment. What are we worried about? Setting a brief about what protection levels we want, what we want it to achieve, and a good strategy, which then eventually comes into the design and then go into places like Mark, where we actually get manufacturers on board to deliver what we need it to do. I would certainly vouch for the CP&I sort of level 1 and level 2 operational requirement system, because rather than just saying have a camera, it tells you what you want the camera to achieve, the performance that's needed, when it's needed, and it looks into far greater things like who's monitoring, when are they monitoring, under what environmental conditions. So it means that when that one event happens, the camera's going to take a picture of what you want when it wants to then affect the response. And I think that's the main thing, you know, that also ties in with the OR. It's not just a camera, it's part of, it's one component of a strategy. So people should be explaining about where that fits in, where it ties in with the physical, where it ties in with the cyber, where it ties in with your operational manager, and how he's going to use that tool, rather than it just being a specified system. It's no good on its own. It's got to be one component of a holistic strategy.
Yeah, really, really good points there, and the idea that it's part of an overall system, a holistic approach to managing risk and things like that is something that definitely seemed to come out of the inquiry. Mark, from your perspective, from the manufacturer's view, is this something? Is this where you can help with? Obviously, you can support in, you know, speaking to consultants, but also speaking to the end users about what they want and what the cameras can actually do for them.
Absolutely. I think that's vitally important because we're developing products behind the scenes. So we're listening and talking to consultants and end users to understand their challenges. And then we'll go away to develop the products. But if they don't know they're there, then what they think is possible is actually, you know, it's a much lower bar. So it's our job to make sure that we can educate the industry, you know, these stakeholders to understand what capabilities we can actually produce. And hopefully that will lead on to obviously a more comprehensive system, something that can give them some really good tools.
Are there any kind of common issues or just sort of general misunderstandings that you're seeing, or is it sort of dependent on?
Yeah, I think you get a lot of Me Too systems. There's a lot of people still, you know, they'll put a big video wall in and watch it all day. Gone are those days. Budget's always at the forefront, and often that can be the issue. I think, you know, it's a lot of sacrifice comes from a budgetary point of view. So I guess it's difficult to put a value on something that's effectively a life system at times. So it's a real challenge. But yeah, for me, I would say it's down to us to make sure the education's there at the front bit as a manufacturer.
Perfect. Obviously, we've just discussed this a little bit, but something that has very much been in the public spotlight here in the UK over the past week or so has been that inquiry into the Manchester Arena attack in 2017. One of the key recommendations that came out of that came out of the inquiry's first report is the implementation of a stringent protect duty, otherwise known as Martin's Law to some in the sector. The anti-terrorism legislation will be designed according to the government to ensure the public is better protected from a multifaceted, diverse and continually evolving terror threat, according to the government. Consultation is currently ongoing at the moment with the industry, obviously, but Stuart, I wonder if you could give a little more insight into what you expect the duty to mean for the industry and what your thoughts are on what it needs to cover.
Yeah, fantastic. I think it's going to be a significant change to the security industry, and it's something that I've been wanting and needing for the whole time I've been in the industry. Whether you work in security operations or as I do in the built environment, we all know that the security is never high on that importance ladder. You know, as Mark just said, it's always been, you know, the costs are being cut. It doesn't matter how bad the risks are. It doesn't matter what you say in the risk assessment. There is always other competing objectives, and security falls down on that ladder of importance. And even on the operational side, we all know that, you know, security guards are not paid as well as they should do. They're not trained as well. It quite often gets lumped in with facilities management. It's a thing that they feel they have to have rather than what they really take seriously. And I think, you know, the inquiry, I've got another comment here that it just says, you know, there was an overriding feeling of it won't happen to us. And that mentality drives all security decision making, and particularly when it comes to cost. And I think the protect duty will change all of that. A lot of my colleagues work in fire and life safety. That's nailed down. You know, if you don't do your fire and life safety, there are fines or you'll go to jail. It's a life safety system. And I think the protect duty is going to bring that in line. And again, one of the things that came out of the Manchester report is that they've said there is no reason why the security should be any less rigorous or robust than fire and life safety and the health and safety environment. A lot of people are calling for a light touch. In fact, even the introduction to the protect duty says it's calling for a light touch regulation. But the Manchester inquiry is saying it should not be a light touch. It should be no less rigorous than fire and life safety. And the amount of times I've been in design meetings where if a fire representative says it must be this, it has to be. The staircase has to move. You know, the wall has to be designed thicker. It's not perfect, as we can see from the Grenfell inquiry and a lot of the other things, you know, but at least it's the start point, sets a much higher bar. And I think this will bring security up to that level. And I don't think there's a security professional or a police officer or anyone else involved in the security environment would disagree with that. As for what it should cover, I think there's another interesting comment here. from the inquiry that I thought I'd read out about as well. It's to do with considerations of eliminating or reducing risk from terrorist attack. They're saying it should be part of the pre-building process, and they recommend that it's not as a voluntary basis, but which is currently the case with CTSAs, but a defined mandatory process with defined outcomes. And that is a massive change. I've worked on lots of projects with CTSAs. They provide excellent advice, but there's very, very few of them. They come in, they dip into the project, provide their advice, and then it's very hard to see them again for several months. And anything they say is voluntary. And I think that the protect duty is going to change that. You know, whether the advice comes from me, whether it comes from another regulatory body or from NACSO, when someone says, you have not done enough, we need you to do more, that will happen. And the Middle East did it very differently. Interestingly, I said I worked in Abu Dhabi on the Crowded Places Protection Program. They benchmarked internationally, and the one resounding outcome of that was that if you don't regulate, it has no impact whatsoever. Nothing changes. So Abu Dhabi enshrined it in law, and all new developments had to go through it. And if as a security professional I said you haven't done enough, they couldn't build the project. It was that simple. It has to be flexible. It has to be practical. You know, every project is different, but it's set a mandatory process, mandatory deliverables, qualified people. But most importantly, it had like what they called a no objection certificate, which they had to previously get from the fire service or the civil defense. They now have to get from the security to say it's okay to build what you do. Now, interestingly, they're not all happy with it. You know, developers don't like being told to spend more money or to put extra measures in. But in time, they learned to adapt to it. And I think what was key over there was no minimum requirement. It's please collaborate, please bring a good person on board, work with us, and we'll do what we can to find a good middle ground. And as long as you did that, then the building would be approved. So I think that needs to be the basis. The consultation has gone out there now. They're seeking news from everyone. But I think Abu Dhabi was a very good benchmark. Rather than setting minimum requirements for bollards and standoff, it should be an informed process, an intelligent outcome, but people have got to do something tangible.
Absolutely, and yeah, there are plenty to unpack there, and thank you very much, Stuart, for your thoughts on that. Sarb, was there anything to add to this? Do you think the cyber risk needs to be included within the scope, maybe? And if so, how do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as Stuart was talking about the Manchester recommendations, and I was thinking to myself, they apply to building. We need to take that same sort of approach to other developments like cities and so on. And then Stuart gave examples of Abu Dhabi and so on. And it's absolutely right. That is something that we need to look at, because, you know, if we are looking for smart cities to be sort of happy places for people and citizens where it's going to improve their life, part of that life is their cyber life, and a cyber attack to, you know, citizens coming into a city, that attack, if loads and loads of citizens are connected to the smart city, be it traffic, be it parking, where they're going to go, what they're going to be doing, who they're connected with, the weather, booking restaurants, all of that, if they're all those things are connected, it's going to affect their happiness. And I think the sort of narrow approach of, you know, happiness about, you know, your health and this and so on, there's been a lot of narrowness and selective narrowness when they've been looking at these, rather than looking at it from a health and safety and a complete health and safety perspective. It's not going to happen overnight, and I think that we're probably 10 years away from when we see a real true smart city where they've integrated a lot of things in the right way. And I think, again, if you look back to the internet as it was, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we were pleased with what we had. We had no idea what we've got today was what was going to be coming. We talked about it and there was talk, but it took 20 years to get to where we are with the type of streaming we've got, you know, whether it's TV programs, videos, all of these things on our mobile devices. And that's the sort of big leap forward that we're going to have in smart cities. And that's the same big leap forward we're going to have in terms of the safety aspects. We need to think about them now. Unfortunately, all these standards, all these legislations, these regulations come way, way too late, when we've seen problem after problem there has to be a big problem to happen for that legislation or regulation to take place. And I really sincerely hope that we don't see that.
Absolutely. And James, I know you've had a response actually published by the government recently on how we make the UK more resilient to extreme risk and emergencies, obviously fitting in something along the lines of the Protect Duty. Can you surmise the message and how this relates to cities and public spaces?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was privileged. Thanks to the Security Institute with Professor Alison Wakefield recommending us to put something together and give evidence to the House of Lords Committee on risk, extreme risk, like James just said. And I pondered it. I had the time because I work from home. And I thought, well, look around the world. How are other countries doing? And I do have a soft spot for South Korea, but basically, 1,900 people lost their lives in the last year, 130,000 here. Why is that? So the population isn't very different, it's slightly smaller. The population of Seoul, South Korea, is 25 million. Oh, sorry, 10 million, and the outer Greater Seoul is 25. And yet they performed better. Now, partly this is because they integrate all the systems we're talking about, CCTV, point of sales, credit card information. They can track things. And they can identify where people are. They can isolate them very quickly within hours rather than days or weeks. They had the app going. They had mask wearing. They had everything going from the very beginning, whereas we didn't. And we didn't. But the key issue, really, and that's just what I said, was that they have the IT capability because they started in 1999 on all this sort of stuff, trying to work out where the data was for all the whole of the city. Then identify it and allocate it to the right places, etc. Then work with the people and work together with them and try and engage them since 2003, where they had ubiquitous technology, they call it. So there's a lot we could learn from them. And yet what happens is we're so proud a nation that we don't go out to other nations that know something about it and ask for their help. Really, I mean, seriously. I'm not saying they don't talk to them like Matt Hancock says he talks to them every day, but that's not really what I mean, because we don't have the IT capability, and they do. Okay, I mean they're not perfect, but no one is a smart. No one's got a perfect smart city, but they've come a long way, and they're quite modest and humble. But so that was my point to the House of Lords, and also helpfully. The American government are actually legislating on this now for the federal government, at least. So they've got an IoT Cyber Security Improvement Act going since January this year. And that is, we don't have that yet, but that's a start. That's quite an advancement to actually have legislation that Stuart's talking about. That's what's going to make a difference, unless you have a regulation on this. And then the other thing is that the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency for America, which looks after the cybersecurity of the national infrastructure, they actually advocate convergence as the best thing to do. And they've got a 4-page guide on how to do convergence and why you should do convergence, which is what we've been saying to do. It's not law, but it's the same, I'd like it to be law, but that's, that's just me, right? But at least they've got the guidance there and they're saying to do it. And they're looking after the national infrastructure. So you'd hope that the US, and there are hopefully some friends on the call from the US, would start implementing the CISO, it's called, the US government's advice, which is basically aligning all the security teams together. Even if you can't put them into one function, you still align them. And you work together all the time. Not just some of the time, on an investigation that happened last week.
Yeah, and the integrated approach here you're talking about is, again, something that we saw a big kind of push for from vendors and responses to surveys we've sent out. Mark, from a surveillance perspective and from your perspective, is integration of surveillance with, of Motorola or Avigilon surveillance solutions something that you're being asked to do with other physical security solutions, as well as, the wider kind of, whether it be in a smart building or smart city or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually connect to all of our own devices using OnViv now. It's one of the most open ways to connect to third-party devices. So we make sure we do that all the time. From an integration perspective to other systems, devices, then we're stepping up our efforts there as well. We've always been an open platform. We write integrations and we allow integrations into our software too. But yeah, you know, it's definitely the direction that we need to be moving. So we have this converged environment, and we want to be able to be as open to that as we possibly can. You know, public space has so many legacy systems within it, and obviously new systems being brought out every day. So it's important that we have, obviously from a cyber point of view, we need to close that loop and make sure that there's no weak link in the chain, as I said before. But in terms of our efforts there, that's certainly a direction that we see going.
Are there any particular verticals or industries in the public space arena, for example, that you're seeing a growth in sort of more advanced solutions being asked from at the moment? Maybe as a result of COVID, I don't know whether sort of publicly accessible larger venues are being sort of looking into more advanced solutions. Is that a trend you're seeing?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of interest from local government, logistics, healthcare. They're the real key ones that have really stepped the interest in their game up this year, I think, you know, with COVID especially. Last year, we were able to repurpose a lot of our own AI. We were able to produce occupancy counting, no face mask detection, and an alert for social distancing, for example. So that one's been particularly useful when you're trying to design a space or redesign a space to keep people socially distant. So that was able to help give an insight into perhaps somebody, you know, designing a location, how that area is performing, and if a lot of people are getting too close, for example. So it's been really, really useful. We're now even working on a project to understand how COVID can potentially move from person to person in a specific environment. So we're able to pivot the analytics in quite a lot of different ways.
Awesome. Yeah. And obviously COVID's had an effect, and I think there'll be a future knock-on effect for further trends and things like this. And Stuart, actually, a question for you here is, you know, as far as the biggest risk to urban spaces and populations are concerned at the moment, where do you see these coming from? I know I've obviously spoken to you previously, and you mentioned vehicle as weapon attacks. Is that something you're seeing a growth of? And if so, how do we mitigate against them?
Yeah, I think it is. Historically, it was always the large vehicle-borne devices, and that was quite simply because the largest vehicle had the largest detonation loads and therefore the greatest impact on the urban space. But that's changed a lot. You know, way back to our 2005 July, we had the multiple coordinated attacks with all like the person-borne devices. But particularly recently, there's been two, and this has been backed up by a lot of research by CPNI, but there's the marauding terrorist attacks, whether that be attack on a single person like the murder of Lee Rigby in Woolwich, there was the stabbings in Streatham, the attack on Fishmongers Hall, Borough Market, where people are just marauding, whether that be armed with weapons or with bladed weapons, or anything they can get their hand on. Really quite simple, very straightforward attacks, no training, minimum equipment, and it doesn't have to be against a large venue. It's anywhere where there is a group of people gathering. And running in parallel, that is the growth of the one that you mentioned, vehicle attacker as a weapon. And again, no explosives needed, hire a vehicle, steal a vehicle, and just drive it at people. Seems to work best against, it's most effective against like a linear or a pedestrian pavement, or on a bridge because they're constrained because they can't escape either side. And we've seen that, whether it be the Finsbury Park Mosque, the attacks on Westminster Bridge, and a lot internationally, whether it be, remember the Corniche in Nice on Bastille Day, or the Berlin Christmas market. And for us professionals, it's very hard. CPNI has done some fantastic research on both of these. And what I do like about being part of the UK structure is we do have some of the best specialists in the world, and they don't just sit back when an attack happens. They research how it's happened, where, why, and then they provide input to that. There's been some excellent guidance on the marauding terrorist attack. There's a whole suite of documents that are out there now, which talk about in the physical environment, about building measures, what they call dynamic lockdown, being able to close down a building if you've got a problem outside, about keeping it inside, or if it's inside and part of your building, being able to slow the movement of the person. There's only a limit to what you can do, but for every minute you can slow the attacker down, people have got time to run. And this is where it fits in with the wider UK national effort of the Run, Hide, Tell campaign, part of the counter-terrorism program. Individual people need to know what to do. because until the police arrive and interdict them, it's down to you. So everything that we can do to provide them, and this is where some of the systems come in, the command and control. If the security control room can see where that attacker is and where they're moving, and they can reverse escalators, automatically seal doors, open doors to let other groupings that are trapped to let them out, that information in that situation is absolutely vital to reducing the number of casualties. And they've also done the same for vehicle attack as a weapon. They've done a lot of research about how those attacks have happened. They still recognize the gold standard of the sort of PAS 68, IWA 14, bollards and road blockers, but they also recognize you can't put them everywhere. You can't protect a whole city. But they've come up with sort of different levels of mitigation that provides a degree of flexibility to owners and operators. And it recognizes that any street furniture, lighting, trees, any clutter along that pedestrian line tends to deter or at least make the driver swerve, because they don't want to hit a pole in case it stops them and then the attack's finished. So I think it will be incumbent on designers of urban spaces to try and make sure that we don't have those long linear runs. Not everywhere, in the quiet areas, it doesn't really matter as much, but when we're deliberately building a classic plaza, a gathering space, an event space, we should be looking. That's a bit of a compromise because a lot of them want it to be minimalistic. We want it to be as open. We want it to be as permeable, but we need to work together, not to make it pedestrian completely proof, although in some of the bigger ones, you would definitely want to pedestrianize the whole area. But in others where we want it to be free flowing, we just need to come up with those sort of flexible levels to try and reach a sensible balance.
Sure, and there's actually a question coming sort of off the back of that here for you, Stuart. And yeah, thank you. Keep sending the questions in. How do you see Martin's Law or the Protect Duty helping the public in open seating areas such as coffee houses, restaurants, that kind of thing?
I think that's the bigger challenge. One of the key parts of the Protect Duty is to work out who comes under it and who doesn't, and the size of venue. And I think they've talked about 100, 250 and larger. The classic iconic venues like Manchester Arena or Wembley Stadium, they're pretty easy to work on. You've got to have a full counter-terrorism plan. You've got to have security teams, a command and control room. You have to have it completely nailed down. As you come down in scale, what can you expect of a coffee shop with one employee? I think what they are doing, which is a good part of the Protect Duty and is already underway, they're making sure there's a lot more information available to everyone, members of the public, about what to do, the part of the Run, Hide, Tell program. There is then another level about what you should do as an operator if you run a venue, however small it is. And that means, they don't expect you to be putting bollards outside of your cafe shop or being able to have dynamic lockdown. But what you should do is be aware of terrorism. You should be aware that if you're in London or in Manchester or even in a village somewhere, it can happen. And you should be aware of that. And you should have thought about it. I did some work recently with a tiny little school in Somerset. And the headmaster said to me, well, it doesn't really happen, does it? I said, unless you were at the school in Dunblane when they attacked. It does. It might only happen to one village school in every 10 years. And we just asked them to be aware of it. And for the teachers to think, if it happens, what would I do? Where would I run? Luckily, this school's got open fields behind. Right, get the children just to run and keep running, and not to come back until it's safe. So there's a lot involved in that. But I think the smaller scale you become, I think the less the obligation under the Protect Duty will become. But I think even for a small coffee shop, you should know about the terrorism risk. You should know about it. If you've got staff, you should talk to them about it. And you should just have a think, what do I do? If they turn up like they did at Borough Market, what do I do? Do I close the door? Do I push the table up in front of the door? Have we got a storage room at the back with a really good strong door that we can go and hide in? Or have we got an escape route out the back that we can tell our customers to do? It just needs people, like we think about evacuation, we have to have a fire strategy, we have to have fire extinguishers. We've got that information, what to do in that situation. I think that's where it will come in.
Absolutely, and funnily enough, evacuation is something we'll be talking about tomorrow at IFSEC Connect and on the evacuation of tall buildings. But some more questions coming in, so I'll get them asked. Mark, I know you mentioned OnViv briefly earlier. Do you and do Motorola view that as the kind of see that as the standard, as the real standard to kind of live up to for integration from video surveillance?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of the reach it's got, there's so many devices now that that come with that, obviously, ready baked in. And yeah, that is absolutely the direction. So we wouldn't connect to our own cameras otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. James, question for you here. In terms of the aerial threat is something that's been pointed out in recent years, and actually something that Sarb sort of mentioned in his presentation earlier. So I'll ask this to you, Sarb, as well in a second. But obviously, drones are providing both a physical and cyber threat to businesses now. Is this something you've noticed?
Yes, that's right. We see a lot of activity, and there's a concern about who makes them. It's all very well done, and what are they meant to be doing, and how are you going to work out what that is? And when you buy them, purchase them, do you know about what the capability they have is, and what they can do, and what the manufacturers are telling you about all these things? So a friend of mine made a comment last year on LinkedIn saying, "Oh, so we're going to lock down everything on CCTV, but where are these drones manufactured, and how can we secure them?" So this is a cyber security issue, which Sarb might talk more about. But there's also the threat to a smart building, obviously, that they're all going around, and we want to try and stop them observing what we can do. And the bottom part of risk, is that you can observe the risk, but do you know when it's wrong? What are you going to do if it's all very well observing it? It's our government observed this risk for over a year now, but it's what's wrong, and so that's what we've got to look at with the drone. We can observe the risk, we can see them, but what are they doing that's wrong? And perhaps Sarb can tell us.
So, yeah, Sarb, I don't know if you want to add anything to that from the cyber kind of threat that they pose.
Yeah, lots of different threats they pose, because apart from many of them having cameras on them, the camera itself, and independently they could have a wireless router attached, whereby they are getting their users inside the building or other devices inside the building connecting to whatever router is on the drone. So that it's the risk and the threat is expanding effectively from what was once upon a time all within and inside the building to outside the building. And it's increased in many ways as routers themselves have got more powerful, wireless routers I'm talking about, where, within London, a single office could be easily accessible to 20, 30 routers around the building, at least. And so many different people connecting to those routers. And not just that, for any one of them to be spoofing a router inside the building isn't that big a deal either. So we're talking about protecting the airspace, and that's what I meant in the introduction, because you do need to protect your airspace, and that airspace, drones are just part of that airspace you need to be protecting. Over the weekend, there was a new vulnerability that was mentioned or was highlighted by a researcher. It was to do with Apple devices and wireless networking. And basically this sort of attack could render your Apple or your iPhone totally useless. Rebooting it will do nothing at all. And that's the sort of thing that we're seeing at the moment. So when we're talking about the airspace and we're talking about wireless or we're talking about drones, they're all controlled, and drones are controlled using your mobile phone. And it could be Bluetooth, it could be wireless, it could be a whole range of different technologies depending on what's built in there. But effectively, the point I'm trying to make is you need to protect your airspace in ways that you didn't need to in the past, and that will get more and more important as we go along, and we see far more attacks on wireless devices and wireless networks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty much all we've got time for, but there's one more question I'd like to ask the panel as a whole, really, and that's what do we see the future city looking like, and what would we call it? We would talk about smart cities, and there are concerns that maybe they're not smart because they're not secure, as I know Sarb has talked about regularly. And is the future city something that connects everything, not just security, not just safety, but also health and well-being, for example? Is that something the panel would agree with? And if so, has anybody got anything to add to that? James, I'll go to you first, and we can just move around.
Yes, I mean, perhaps going back to South Korea, who've been developing this for longer than most other places, they've gone for happiness of the citizen, but also if it's possible, they put nature first. So they've got the environment at the very forefront, and that the technology is there to support that and to help it sustain the nature that's already there. And so they put nature at the very big foundation stone, and then, which I thought was, and that will help people be more, you know, on the environment, all that stuff, and all the current climate change emphasis. You know, that is a good way to go. Yeah,
interesting point. Not something I necessarily would have thought of. Mark, have you got anything to add? You know, where you see the future city lying?
Yeah, I think I can certainly see this happening in the future. When I think of how where you start to manufacture a product, we want it to be open and obviously connect to other devices. And I think nowadays pretty much everything goes down that road, whether it's a smart speaker in your house or your phone, they all talk to each other. So it's definitely the way I can see things evolving, no question.
Right, Stuart?
I think I've got quite a different view on this, in that I'm lucky enough to work with a lot of amazing master planners that are building new cities, particularly in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East region. And every one of those disciplines has a completely different view. You know, a lot of my planners are thinking about how do we remove vehicles from it. You know, everyone's benefited from the clean air from COVID. So there's this great movement now about how do we increase cycle routes and pedestrians and get rid of vehicles, or sustainability gets pushed to the, our future cities should be mainly sustainable above all else. And I'm sort of from that classic school of theory with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Safety and security has always been one of them. You've only got to go back to history, whereby our original cities were walled. You know, we didn't let anyone in. You know, we kept everyone out, or if the invaders came, we could pull the drawbridge up. And obviously our cities have got to be far more permeable, and that we're all global, we're all connected. But I think trying to get safety and security embedded from the outset is key. Working with these planners, because they're going to create amazing cities, whatever happens. But everyone focuses on their own little bit, whether it's sustainability, transport, But for me, it's like, well, let's just make sure we've got a voice at the table, because no one wants to live in a dangerous city. You know, everyone knows where the dangerous places are within a country and internationally, and you don't go there as a tourist visitor because they're too dangerous. Well, that's what we've got to be conscious of. And whilst we can't solve all of that, you know, we've always got a difficult society and population. We live in the real world, but it is our job to make it as good as possible. We've got to build it as safe as possible. That's where the pedestrianisation and crime prevention through environmental design comes in. But equally, it's where like we've got companies like Mark's making sure that we've got that total situational awareness that we can bring in, whether it be private security or policing, to bring them in to react to it as soon as possible. And without doubt, you know, with Sarb and James with the cyber stuff as well, just make sure that when someone designs a new city, making it safe and secure is just as important as it being sustainable and amazing.
Absolutely. And Sarb, final point.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with a lot of the points that have been made already. And I think the bottom line is smart cities should be and are about people. Everything that anyone's tried to do has been about them. The thing is that we are learning, we are evolving, and our thinking is evolving. And at the moment, and we will have for a long time, too many stakeholders around smart cities. And what we need to do, we're not going to change things overnight. And there's no reason why we should try and do that. What we should do is one step at a time. Okay, so we're working on smart building or a smart city. Next time round, we're going to bring this forward. We're going to bring that forward. We can't do it, although we need to be 5 steps ahead, or we need to bring them up much closer to the starting point. What we're going to do is just move them 1 step and start introducing them slowly, step by step, as opposed to accept that we don't do it at the moment and we need to do it and carrying on accepting and not bringing them in. And I think it will happen, and technology will have to change. It will have to change to accommodate the world that we live in, the world that's changing, the world that we're living in today, as Stuart has pointed out so many times, is so different from the world we lived in, last year. And COVID has changed that. And I think there'll be other things that will change it. And we need to make sure that technology adapts to what we're trying to achieve with smart cities. And I think in terms of the phrase, if we stick to smart cities, it will be a long time before we have one. And I think this is where the National Cybersecurity Centre's approach to calling them connected places is actually is a good way to go, because if we look at smart cities, and I've criticised the definition of smart cities, because many places that have a smart infrastructure are calling themselves a smart city, and they're not, because it's similar to getting a smart kettle and a smart TV and calling your home a smart home. Well, it's not a smart home. It's a home with a smart kettle and a smart TV in it. Similarly, smart cities can't be smart cities if it's got one smart infrastructure. You need a whole range of things. And the way to approach them is to think, right, okay, these aren't smart cities yet, but there is a connected place. And if we're talking about a connected place in the way that the National Cybersecurity Centre looked at it, well, every place is a connected place. And if it's a connected place, we need to have an approach, and they provided an approach on how to look at security, and that's really good. And I think that's a really, really good starting point. Let's not get hung up on, thousands of things need to be in before it's called a smart city. Let's focus on what we need to do to secure the here and now and moving forward, and how we can move into our future that's going to be more secure. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Spot on. Thank you, all of you. That was excellent, and that's unfortunately all the time we have for questions today. A quick thank you to obviously our speakers, Sarb, James, Mark, and Stuart, for your insight and expertise. I really do think that made for a fantastic discussion. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Avigilon and Motorola Solutions. For those who'd like to know more about Avigilon, do visit their booth on the IFSEC Connect platform. Have a browse, set up a meeting if you wish. And thank you to everyone in the audience for your questions, participation, and attention today. Within the next 24 to 48 hours, today's discussion will be available to watch back on demand on the IFSEC Connect platform. Please feel free to invite colleagues, peers who may not have had much of a chance to listen to the event, and get them involved in IFSEC Connect as well. It's worth reminding you that there's loads of other good content already on Connect, and you can watch it back on demand on the platform. I'd particularly like to highlight the previous three IFSEC Strat Talks, where separate panels discuss the future challenges and opportunities in video surveillance, access control, and intruder alarms, all of which fits into where we were at today. Each one has a free ebook to download as well, so just head to the sessions tab, filter by security, and they should be nice and easy to find from there. Plus, there's loads of exclusive product demos, as well as content from our co-located shows, Safety and Health Expo, FireX, Facilities Show, Intelligent Buildings Europe, and the Workplace Wellbeing Show. And I'd encourage everyone to keep utilising the platform as much as you have time for over the remainder of this month. We hope it provides you with the first chance in a long time to connect with new suppliers and industry peers, or simply reconnect with those you have long-standing relationships with already. But that's everything from today's session. Thank you, all the speakers, for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, James.